Good morning, everyone. My name is Gabby Carrion, and on behalf of Carousel Technology Corporation, I would like to welcome you all to our webinar. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. P.
Thank you, Gabby. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session on data discovery. Let me just quickly fill you in on the agenda that we have for you. We'll be going through what does data discovery mean, and we want to give you as well an opportunity to let us know what data discovery means for you. Please watch out the Q&A channel to provide your answers. And we'll follow that with looking at the challenges and opportunities, followed with what does a data discovery solution, what are the key components of it, and to share with you some of the use cases and case studies that our distinguished panel has experienced and has had a chance to address in their career so far. And we'll wrap up with a call to action and key takeaways. Please hang on till the end because there's some cool giveaways that we have for all of you. So the poll question should be up on your screen, which says, what does data discovery mean to you? Please go ahead and provide your response while we go ahead and introduce the distinguished panel. First, let me introduce myself. I am Pragyansmita Nayak. I function as Chief Data Scientist with Hitachi Federal. And we have been running this monthly webinar, Talk Data to Me, and I have the honor of moderating this session today, this panel discussion today. I have over 24 plus years of software development experience, including 19 years in federal government contracting, focusing on data science and data architectures. As my hobby, I love solving puzzles, knitting, embroidery, and all that. Everything that involves my working with my hand. And so you can imagine my chiropractor is never too happy with it. And following on my contact information in there, the email and LinkedIn, please feel free to reach out to me. With this, I will pass it on to Adam. Adam, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Burstein. I'm the Director of Data Governance at the Executive Office of the President. I have 26 years of IT experience, including 14 in the federal government, and most of my time has been centered on application design and development. Of course, not written there, but very much implied is managing data. I have a master's in computer science from NYU. I have certifications including PMP, ITIL, V3 Foundations, and CISSP. I have also 12 US patents involving application development and domain name services. In my free time, if that's a thing, I love to support my kids in their musical and athletic activities. I'm also a strong advocate for music and arts in the school and in schools. And there's my email address. And if you find me on LinkedIn, that's great. I really don't use it, but you're welcome to find me there.
Thank you, Adam. And let's see how we can tie together data and music and athletic activities together. With this, I'll pass it on to David. David, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm David Gagliano. Pleasure to be here and part of the panel. I'm getting an opportunity to talk with some of the more distinguished thought leaders in our area. My background is of technology stewardship in multiple roles as Chief Technology Officer in defense, in healthcare, and in commercial at the enterprise level, looking globally at impact of solutions that leverage data in order to make it possible. My certifications include a master's in technology management from George Mason, the Federal Executive Competency Certificate from the CIO University, and my undergraduate degree in computer science. So a little bit leaning towards both technology and the management of that technology. The certs, I think, are probably more than are worth bringing to the table, as much as highlighting some of them that are more recent. One of them, the Darden School of Executive Management, and the other one that I thought was quite fun from the University of Houston on strategic foresight, being able to not just use data and trend analysis, but better, with better fidelity, predict the future. Things I love to do, I love to take disruptive technologies and just gore the heck out of a business model that no longer is making sense or delivering the value that it should be. So bottom line, coming to the table faster than the competition and exceeding customer expectations. I love travel, especially adventure travel, and I've been working my way through around some of the more historic sites around the planet. So kind of a bucket list of places to go. Please, I do welcome the outreach. I use my email, I use my LinkedIn, I use 50 other comms channels. I'm easily found. Find me, reach out, love to talk to people.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. and always look forward to your notes on the different events you attend. So thank you for dropping them in such a timely manner and filling us in when we have not had a chance to attend those events. So appreciate it. And nice to have you all in this session. And with last but not the least, Ajay, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Ajay Vohora, pleasure to be here today. I've had most of my career the good fortune to work with many data practitioners across principally energy, in oil and gas, renewables, and in financial services and in government for critical infrastructure as well, with users of tools, technologies over that time across the whole plethora of wherever data sits and is consumed. Started my journey with data with IBM many years ago at their research labs at Hursley. And fun fact about me, I've attended so many board meetings, more than anyone else that I know, but the reality is most of them have been on the ocean, on a surfboard. Feel free to reach out.
Seems like you like complex things like the ocean and data and data discovery as we are talking today. First of all, thank you everyone, all three of you, for being here on this panel. It's an honor to have this discussion on data discovery with you and your rich experience in the field. So, and I have had the honor to work with all of you in some capacity or the other, and for more than a year with each. And I'm so glad to have you on this joint panel discussion and bring the same discussion to the wider data community. And to the audience, I'll say, please use the chat and the polls to interact with us, give us your feedback, and keep this engaging, both for us and for yourself as well. So we will start off with the first question. Let me stop sharing the screen at this point so you can see all of us in more clarity. The panel is what it is today. It is what we want to bring to you, not to death by PowerPoint. So at this point, let's start off with the topic of the day, data discovery. What does that mean to each of you? And we can start off with, I can go on the order that you show up on my screen. So Ajay, why don't you go ahead first? What does data discovery mean to you?
I usually characterize it as building, generating intelligence about the data, ultimately to answer a question. And that intelligence about the data can be across data sources, whether it's devices, assets, databases, documents, across data formats, whether it's PDF or Parquet in the data lake, and then building up that picture of intelligence on the data that puts the data into context, which is becoming more and more important when applications and AI and models and workflows are consuming data. It's important to put that into context, with lineage, with perhaps a way to visualize that data across upstream data sources all the way down to where it's consumed. I think the final aspect that ties together well with data discovery for me has always been how quickly can we provide observability of that intelligence about the data in terms of its usage, changes to the data, health of that data in terms of the quality.
Awesome. I think one key piece that you highlighted was the importance of context in the data. We will definitely come back to that later on in the question. We'd love to hear more about it and its importance, because the raw data by itself has value, but then the context definitely increases the value. I can't even number it. So we'll definitely come back to that. We'll pass it on to David. David, what does data discovery mean to you?
There's two things. The context dialogue is an important one, and I think it's worth talking about more. But it never ceases to astonish me how many mission critical, business vital, and impactful decisions are made with a gut feel by senior leadership without necessarily understanding what was either the drivers, the significance of the impact, or the data that substantiates the decisions that are being taken. In my mind, the data discovery really means two things. It means better informed decisions, not just decisions and actions that are taken, but those that are driven and borne out by supporting data. But two, I think the emphasis on discovery is an iterative cycle where you have to be willing to learn, to take the time to figure out what the data is actually saying, even if you had a suspicion going into it, maybe a bias looking for validation of a course of action. But at the end of the day, open to being surprised and learning what the data is actually telling you.
I like that, the surprising factor, without the hallucinations, I hope.
Absolutely.
Adam, please go ahead. What does data discovery mean to you?
I think AJ and David covered it really well, but basically, in its most basic sense, it's calling data from a lot of different places to see what story it's telling you and how you can use that to leverage that data for furthering your goals, whether it's a business goal, whether it's a technical goal, whether it's a security goal. And one of the things that I just want to kind of follow up with what David said is you can't be afraid to find out that you're wrong in the process. Having preconceived notions is great, but having preconceived notions is 50% of the time at least wrong. So just be prepared to accept that you're wrong. I think the other thing about iteration and going through the process is realizing not just that your data is telling you a story, but even how you're planning to use that data may not be fully vetted in the beginning. So while you may be trying to go down one path in order to find out how you can achieve those goals or how you can better your environment, whatever that environment is, you may be looking at the wrong thing or in the wrong way. So you need to be flexible, and you need to also realize that you're not the smartest person in the room. The smartest person in the room is the one who knows that they're not, and that they're going to leverage all the people around them to help them get the answers to the questions that maybe they're not even thinking about how to answer, how to ask in the first place. So that's my 2 cents.
Hey, Adam, I wanted to pull on one of the threads because you reminded me of something that are some painful lessons about data discovery. And one of them is this idea of you have to be prepared to be wrong. I don't think I have ever overseen, delivered on, required a data investigatory process that didn't always start as wrong. And that second point that you'd mentioned was at the beginning, that this idea that there's an iterative journey to get to where you need to get. And frankly, the early parts often exposes flaws not in the analysis, but in the underlying data cleanliness that have to be addressed in order for the results you're generating to be credible and no longer be wrong. Maybe you're still at a variance from your initial presumptions, but this iterative cycle to make sure that you're using the data intelligently and understand the biases that some unclean or unused data might be introducing is a key part of that cycle.
Absolutely. All great points. And it kind of brings back to one of my most earlier experiences when I started on this data journey, working on applying machine learning as part of my PhD thesis. Back then, there were certain findings I had, which I shared with my advisor, and I showed him all the things that worked. And he's like, you didn't come at this right at the beginning. You went through a lot of other things to get to this point. Why is that not part of the documentation that you're showing me? And that's key, that was not just key in my thesis work, but also it's key in our professional data services that we are providing, where there is some amount of data analytics, data engineering, data science involved. And it kind of aligns with what all three of you mentioned in terms of providing the context, understanding, being flexible, being agile, understanding that what you are starting off with is not what you will likely end with. You may end with it, but you will end with something plus as well. And the context, the observability, being prepared for surprises, and keeping the story in mind. That's also important, or rather keeping track of the story as it is evolving. I think that brings us to also our next poll question. So, Gabby, I would request you to bring up the poll question for the audience, where we are looking at a related question to the definition of data discovery. So at this point, I'd like the esteemed panel ask about what are some of the challenges and impact of those challenges in government data management, in public sector data management from your experiences. So, Adam, would you like to kick us off in this particular question?
Sure. So I'm going to start by saying I am speaking in my unofficial capacity, so I'm speaking for Adam Burstein, not for the organization I work for. I'll start by saying that there are, based on Google searches, 2.5 million federal employees and another roughly 4 million federal contractors. And of that, what is that, 6.6 million people, all but 3,000 have one statute that applies to them, which is called the Federal Records Act. We also, in our environment, have another organization, another statute that applies to us called Presidential Records Act. You may have heard of it. So that applies to about 3,000 people. So the way we think of data is inherently different from the rest of the federal government and probably the rest of humanity in some ways. When we wake up in the morning and go to work, we think about everything we write down, everything we communicate, because it persists, whether or not we want it to. It's kind of like living on the internet. Whereas, on paper records or whatever that exists in a law firm or in a private industry or even in a lot of federal records organizations, they don't need to think about data the same way we do. So we have to think about specifically, how do we actually segregate data between the PRA or the Presidential Records Act and the Federal Records Act organizations, because there are different rules that apply with those two spaces. So we don't want our PRA data to be commingled with FRA. We don't want FRA data to be commingled with PRA. So for us, the concept of like a data silo is a welcome opportunity. For many organizations, having something like a data silo is like, oh my God, no, we're cordoning off data that we can leverage. We don't want that in many of our cases. So that's kind of a different flavor of how we deal with data from anywhere else. We also have to think about how do we get that data ready for the public to consume it in time. It will be releasable. Excuse me. How do we collect it from where it needs to be? How do we know what needs to be collected? Because not everything that we do is a record. If I have my lunch receipt that gets emailed to me, that's not a record. If I write down someone's phone number on a sticky note, that's not a record. But if I write down notes from a meeting on a piece of paper and I act on that, well, that's a different thing. By the way, if you are interested, 44 USC 2201 is Presidential Records Act. Have fun. It's a great read. And 31 USC 3101 is FRA. It's a lot shorter read. But we do welcome that siloing of data. We do still need to secure both of them the same way. We do still need to maintain them in a sensible eye. We do still need to perform analytics on whether it's PRA or FRA data, but we need to do it separately and safely, and thinking about how this will be persisted for the life of the Republic in the case of the PRA, or for its record statute period for the FRA. So.
Awesome. I particularly like the part where you mentioned about the intentional data silos, which have to be there for a reason between your PRA and FRA. And just for the audience who may have lost track of what PRA and FRA means, let me just repeat it once more. PRA stands for Presidential Records Act and FRA stands for Federal Records Act. Did I get that right, Adam? I hope I did.
Yes, you did. Presidential Records Act, Federal Records Act. That's correct.
Perfect.
I think a lot more people are both aware of and trying to understand the PRA today than they ever wanted to do. And it is an important and timely document. So I think that we'll be learning more about that in the months ahead.
Yeah, and actually, I'd just like to give a shout out to National Archives at this point, because they do have short videos, a short record training available on each of these, and the records management that they do. Again, they're not huge, so they're very short training videos. So definitely viewable and usable, and not getting you all bored. I was trying to avoid the word bored here. David, what are some of the challenges that
You know what?
faced?
I'll share with the folks one of the most painful lessons I had in data and data discovery was making the business case. This tell you a little bit how old, to a senior leader in the Pentagon about the opportunities to move on to web-based technologies. And I built a prototype of the organization's phone book application with 6 names and addresses in the phone book entries, just as a demo in order to brief the senior leader. And we came to the conference room, got set up. This is an innovative, taking defense into a new era that I think everyone was going to be, strong on. And the first comment out of their mouth was, "You've got so-and-so's phone number wrong. Where did you get the data?" "Oh, well, we got it from your admin." "Oh, well, they're the right person to get it from." And then a person on the other side of the table said, "Oh no, my admin tracks the data for these people." And then they started haggling. And at the end of an hour of haggle, we got up and made no progress whatsoever because the authoritative source for the controlling data was not well defined in the organization. And that led to an impasse that shut down our attempts at better efficiency delivery. And it's a lesson that I've carried with me, the scars of all the bad meetings that went wrong. Because it was, 6 data entries. How bad could it be? But really, it exposed the challenges of data governance and the cleanliness of the lines of authority in turning to the authoritative sources. This is not a problem that's gone away. It's gotten significantly larger as organizations now tap into silos of critical data necessary to drive their operations, but haggle over ownership, lines of authority, haggle over currency and the context of the data that they're drawing upon. So huge open issues that paramount to get right.
Awesome. And this actually, I think this is a story I will share more often now. I always share one experience or something I learned from when I was attending a conference, and somebody from one of the services had mentioned how their name shows up in 40 different systems, and it is incorrect in 30 of them. So that just brings us into that whole concept of master data management that we talk about today, right? Where you're trying to make sure that the entity being referenced, irrespective of how it is stored in the different systems, we should, as a data practitioner, know that they all mean the same individual entity. But I think your story is even more compelling, and I'm going to steal that with you. I'll reference you and I'll share that. But this just tells us why data science and working with data is such a challenge. It is not for the faint-hearted, for sure. Let's just put it that way. But yes, Ajay, please share what are some of the challenges from your end?
So if I look across how Hitachi has the ability in where it's helping different programs across different agencies, they probably boil down to what Adam and David, just to build on that, is those referential data sets, in some sense silos, that are there to either drive time to insights for decisioning, as David mentioned, but also increasingly now to drive more operational process workflows with some automation to augment work and deploying AI to do that. And it's coming down to the ability to now create these high quality single version of truth. You mentioned data mastering and compliant usage of that data that you can put controls around. those data sets, you can, and what we've been doing more and more of is exactly that at and even at state level. I think that then acts as a force multiplier for driving insights from accurate, clean, quality, single version of truth data sets that are in some sense immutable, and you want them to be immutable to avoid change downstream, and one department ending up, or part of a department of an agency ending up with a different interpretation of the same data set. And that could relate to something as simple as names, phone numbers, addresses, but when you start to then think of the services that are built off those, the data that's delivered, and that could be citizen services around housing, health, taxation, revenue, it can have a downstream effect if upstream those referential curated data sets are not precise.
Absolutely. The referential integrity of your data is so important. And we will be discussing more about this, but let me quickly go through what the audience has had a chance to provide. And it kind of aligns with what we have been talking about. I'll just briefly cover through some of the responses. It has been about how do we get insight? So what does data discovery mean? And this is from the audience input is, how do you get insight? Finding answers to questions we did not know to ask. And that's the iterative or the agile journey, data journey that we go through anytime we are pursuing a data discovery exercise, or you're trying to address an analytics question, and you're going through the process of discovering your data assets. Discovering insight into what's on your network and telling valuable data stories with available data that can be quickly digested by viewers and readers. I think that's an important point as to how simple you make it for the recipients of the data product to review what you have come up with as your data findings, and for them to be able to use it. Because if it is complex, most likely it's not going to be used, and you lose the valuable work that has gone into that entire process, entire data discovery and the data analytics process. And one last definition that I want to cover from the audience, which I thought really resonated well, is data discovery is a search navigation process, finding the data that you want with precision, and the number of steps that you have to take and validating the data are all key. Any thoughts on the input from the audience so far? Anybody wants to add something that you want to add on it you may have forgotten to mention, or you just came to your mind?
I think all of those just point to how multifaceted data discovery is, and the different ways to approach it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, a fun question now. We posed the question to the audience now for the panelists, and we will cover what the audience said shortly. But first, I want the panelists take on, as you work on your data discovery process, or right now, as you look back, what would be a book, movie, music that you would associate with the data discovery process? AJ, you want to go first?
Sure. What comes to my mind in working on data discovery with government, with agencies, is a movie, actually one that we probably all know, and a series of movies, Indiana Jones. You can think of Raiders of the Lost Ark as one of them, but the entire series sort of alludes to, no two data discovery missions are quite the same. There's always hidden treasure that is unlocked, waiting to be found, and the mission, the objective might seem clear up front, to unlock that hidden value, to secure a set of artifacts, to find, put them into retention, archive. But again, just within data discovery, from experience working with data practitioners, the reality is that those missions are very difficult to complete on your own. You need to build some of those local guides, interpreters to give that context and provide validation when it comes to attributing the lineage, the source of data. There's machine learning, AI, natural language processing, a whole basket of techniques and methods that can be applied to that, but it still needs that experts, human in the loop to provide that guidance to be sure that it makes sense in an operational setting for what may have been an automated data discovery process in part.
Awesome. It's data is a team sport. It's like I can stress enough on the importance of the domain expert here, but then the suspense and the entertainment value. When the work is done, it's something to be proud of, but as you're going through it, you tend to question life. So why am I doing this? What is happening? Why am I here? So yeah, definitely Indiana Jones it is. And Adam, I see you nodding, so please,
Yeah,
what do
well,
you associate with?
I have my two comical answers first, right? So there's the Brady Bunch, specifically the episode where they're playing ball in the house, and mom said, "Don't play ball in the house," and little by little you learn more. The Love Boat, of course, every episode starts off with a miscommunication, and then somewhere along the line you learn more information. Yeah, those are my joke answers. The real answers for me are two movies actually: Sneakers and National Treasure. National Treasure, I think AJ kind of covered, very similar concept with excuse me, with the Indiana Jones series. Every piece of information you get unlocks the next step for you in how to discover your ultimate goal, right? If you haven't seen National Treasure, it's a kids movie. Starts off by looking at the Declaration of Independence and takes you through Philadelphia and it takes you through New York City. Just everything unlocks the next piece of the puzzle for you. So I think that's really kind of how I think of data discovery and data analytics in general. The other one is Sneakers, which was a Robert Redford movie, and James Earl Jones was in it, and a bunch of famous people back in, I think, the 90s or something like that, maybe late 80s, early 90s, where again, everything kind of unlocks the next thing. And, it's these guys from, I think it was NSA, that are trying to figure out, who's doing all this bad stuff. And it turns out to be, someone unexpected, without ruining the movie. And just everything was just like one thing that led to the next, and the entire thing is just about data collection. And then at one point there's cryptography built, a bunch of times there's cryptography that comes into play. There's, how do I get information from here and leverage that? So how do I get a voice print so I can use that to open a door? Everything is about how to further my goal along my path in order to get to my ultimate, the ultimate end of my journey. And even then, do they really get to the end of their journey, or is it the start of another journey? I think that's true of National Treasure and Sneakers. So
Awesome. And I know what movie I'll be trying to catch up tonight. Sneakers, because I haven't watched it.
Yeah,
great.
I would argue Sneakers tends to highlight the overlap into other domains, including cybersecurity and operational security, that are just as critical and driven by data, depending upon what your objective is in the goal. I actually had two that came to mind, and one of them I think is kind of a good example of a lot of the data discovery work, and that would have to be the matrix, simply because there's a lot going on. It's all around us. The problem's bigger than you thought it was, and you're really not sure at any given point what it all means. So, I think that's pretty fair. But, the counterpoint to that is actually one of my personal passions. I'm a big fan of mystery movies, and the Sherlock Holmesian archetypes are a classic for a reason and cannot be beat. And when you think about the way that the great detective always engages, it's showing up when it's critical as a consultant, as a friend to government, as a partner to the folks that are engaged in a mission that is compelling, and searches through clues, and the critical insights that they make from that makes a difference at the end of the day. So gotta love Sherlock Holmes.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan myself here. So I'm just amazed that the answers I had in my mind, it didn't match with any of yours, but it did in some way. Because it was all about mystery and stuff like that. Oh, and it's amazing to hear all your insights on that. So I'll just quickly say what I have in mind. So for me, it'll be, I was thinking of Sherlock Holmes, but also I'm a huge fan of Dan Brown, the Da Vinci Code, again, because the same
A
thing,
good
a
one.
lot of different types of data, connecting the dots, figuring out the mystery, and also it kind of aligns with my interest in learning more about history. And data around the history and connecting the dots there. So that's why I like Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. But the music, I will say, is um, the the music that they play during the award ceremonies when somebody is trying to give their speech and they want them to wrap up. I feel that music kind of resonates with us when we are in that process of solving a problem. You are in that path of saying that I have to complete this task in a given time. How do I find the data that will help me get something going to begin with? And then this Oscar music starts playing in the background and you are like rushed. You know you want to do a good job, but then you're also under the stress of timeline. So yeah, and that kind of brings us to how do we solve this data discovery challenges? And before I move on to the next question, I definitely want to cover some of the responses from the audience. They have mentioned the day after tomorrow, Bill Withers, Lean on Me, or Gloria Gaynor, I Will Survive. I'm guessing that's a song.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll survive. Okay. And I think it kind of beats my
Then.
exactly. And let me see, are there any other responses? Okay, if you haven't had a chance to give your response, please, you can drop it in the Q&A response as well if the poll window has dropped, and this is for the audience.
Can I just add one? Can I just add one thing, Bethany?
Sure.
So I think I don't think there can possibly be a wrong answer, right? I think anyone who's looking at that question, I mean, interestingly enough, I'm talking about being a school music advocate, and I didn't talk about songs, right? So Michael Markowski, Welcome to Mars, the William Tell Overture, every one of them is kind of like different themes that all come together to tell a whole story, right? That's exactly what this is all about. I think if anyone can, I think it's a bigger challenge to say, give me a book, a song, a movie, a musical, whatever it is, that doesn't resonate in terms of this. Because if you're watching that, then you're just watching a blank screen, right? Human nature is to try and be intrigued by what you're experiencing in life. You don't want to listen to just a single note playing on a vibraphone. What I'm choosing a random instrument. You don't want to watch a blank screen. You want to be enthralled by whatever you're experiencing, and that has to be part of many parts of a story that come together to give you a bigger picture. And what's the biggest thing that everyone hates is a cliffhanger, right? When you get to the end of a season and it's like, oh my God, the story didn't end yet. Now I have to wait for the next season to find out what happened. That talks about the importance of our need to have stories that are the result of coming together of lots of different pieces, lots of different data elements that make up a bigger picture. So I would actually find a bigger challenge if someone found something that didn't resonate. I don't know if you want to put that up as a poll, but that's a good question.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I feel like we can have one webinar entirely on this topic itself. But that's great. So let's quickly move on to the next topic. Not quickly, but let's move to the next question, which kind of ties to all that we have discussed so far, of course. What are some of the key components of a data discovery solution that you have experienced? David, you want to go first?
I will qualify the question with the qualifier of a successful data discovery, because the process of discovery has so many pitfalls that can waylay the team, and you can get caught up in the analysis, in the data cleanliness, in the infrastructure, and the authoritative sources, that it can be really hard to actually remember that you're supposed to be solving a specific problem or getting to a specific value that the customers are looking for. In my mind, qualifying upfront expectations, qualifying scope of the discovery, scope of the pursuit, as you start to then dive into the organizational's data, really helps with an iterative cycle. If you are going to deliver everything at one big go, one final show and unveiling, you're pretty much guaranteed, I think, to fail. Small increment collaborative engagements with the stakeholder as you advance towards the value proposition with a pre-agreed upon, perhaps sliding scale of what it means when you're done. The other piece I would add to that is what happens after you're done, getting some clarity about the organizational's data governance strategy so that the kind of answers that you're looking for aren't a one-off, but become part of a culture that it's the gift that keeps giving as the organization comes back later to try and do other analytics.
Absolutely. Adam?
I think, David said a lot of really important things there. So first of all, knowing what your goal is. I think even before, and maybe I missed it in David's response, I apologize if I did. I think the first thing is more important than the tool or the solution is having buy-in. Do you have a champion for your initiatives? Someone who's going to help you ensure that you're not just doing this for busy work, or you're not short on the tools you'll need, whatever those are going to be, in order to provide the value back to the organization. So, excuse me. I think that's the most important starting point. As an agile organization, or every organization I've worked in, for the past 20 years has had different flavors of agile. I think that, it is about making sure that you can iterate through your data, and you can go back and realize that you now need to change how you're doing it. And but the other thing that David did touch on was definition of done, right? So how do we know when we've achieved our goal for this iteration? I don't think you're ever done. I don't think there's such a thing as done on the overall data analytics or data discovery or data processing or data presentation. I think there's the definition of done for this stage of the work. How do I answer the question to National Archives? Did I give you everything you're supposed to get? How do I respond back to a company's shareholders that these are the goals we've met, and these are the goals that are not yet met, or these are the goals we've abandoned. So being able to answer those questions requires that you know what questions you're trying to ask, get everyone to agree on what those are. And then in terms of, a solution, I think I don't know that there's a solution that people need to look at. I think it's a hybrid of multiple solutions because they serve different purposes. So you're going to need some tools that will allow a developer to do their work. You're going to need tools that will allow a business person who doesn't know the development side of it to do their work. And by the way, when I say developers have no idea what the business side is, right? They just know they need to run a SQL query or whatever, a Solr query or whatever it is, in order to answer a question that they've been given, but don't necessarily know how the business is going to use that. So you need to be able to deploy a complement of tools that will allow different users to get different value out of it by still answering the same questions consistently and correctly every single time. And this goes back to the data quality that both AJ and David were talking about earlier. If I ask you what's your name and you say David, and then I ask you tomorrow what's your name and you say Bob, I don't have consistent data. There's something wrong with the way I'm going about solving my problem. I need to make sure that I've addressed that, and that's on me. That's not on a tool. It's not on the solution. That's on the data quality.
Absolutely. So that kind of brings us to data quality, data lineage, provenance, how all these different things need to be fitted together to come up with the complete solution, and not one individual thing is the solution. But yeah, definitely you're highlighting what is the definition of done, and also the fact that it's a hybrid collection of solutions that make up a data discovery solution. AJ, from product perspective, what would you like to add here?
Well, yeah, bringing all of those facets together, it's really about providing contextualization of that data. Then we can just step back here and think about all the organizations that we've worked with, and the state of their data and the silos, the different systems, tend to reflect how those organizations have evolved over time, whether it's, implementing a data lake, records management, different systems for operations, those silos, and being able to connect different parts of an organization, and pulling data from those different parts and putting that into context. The contextualization piece is key, and having the IP to try to sort of automate that, remove the manual overhead and the lift to do that is then what leads to what some of the audience have been talking about, which is how you then search and navigate. So I think once the technical content contextualization has been applied, absolutely, it's the ability to provide search and navigation, and maybe in a visual way, in more of a human-centric way, where the data and the systems that it lives in are necessarily systems, code, applications, but many people tend to understand what answers that they can use to then drive that next set of questions. It's just more helpful usually if we see that visualized either in a graph or in a visual lineage, and that gives somebody a starting point at the end of the piece of thread to start pulling on, to start to tease out the next stage of their quest.
Absolutely. So we have spoken about the challenges and roadblocks, the definition of data discovery, and then we were talking about some of the components that you would typically think of as part of a data discovery solution. Are there any specific use cases that you want to highlight from the different domains, not just the government or public sector domain, but from any other domain also that you would want to highlight as part of this? Ajay, you want to start off? Yeah.
I think from experience that the most fascinating and interesting has been in the area of supply chain. And I say that because the way in which everything from sourcing materials to manufacturing to building components and those then going into operation, there's an inherent fragmentation within supply chains, and being able to run data discovery across that fragmented supply chain, then starts to build a picture of inventory components that might be critical to know where those components are being sourced from. And what's really neat when you start to build that picture is presenting that in a hierarchical form. So how does the component fit into a subsystem? How does that roll up to the suppliers, the distributors, the manufacturers, the sites, location into which it's deployed, and who's supporting that in an operation is, I think, the most interesting cases then are in supply chain, particularly now with the automation around real-time IoT that is becoming more and more deployed across supply chains as well.
I would like to come back to the earlier note when you had mentioned about context and its importance in a data discovery and a data solution. Is there any use case that you want to highlight where context became more important or became critically important as part of the solution?
Yeah, we can look at, for example, a use case in the energy utilities market where analyzing energy consumption versus production and generation in real time or near real time, it helps then solve from where is that energy being supplied from? Is it in a renewable generated source, or are you buying natural gas off the grid to then supply different peaks of demand? The context of the source of supply and to where to apply that on the grid, I think that's just a fascinating setting for those use cases where context becomes super important because you're tying data about something, in this case, the origination of the energy generation, to perhaps a preference on what type of energy is consumed and the cost of that energy to either store it, supply it, or to make it available.
Awesome. That's very interesting to hear about. Can't wait to learn more. David, any use cases that you would like to share?
You know, I was thinking about this. There are 3 points I think are important to make. One, I think you would have a hard time finding any use cases that wouldn't benefit from data discovery. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. Better informed decision making. But then the second thing that comes to mind is those times where data alone is not enough. And I think it's relatively easy to find the decisions taken by bold leaders that were contrary to what the data was telling them. I think a current example might be Tesla. And whether you like the Cybertruck or hate the Cybertruck, everybody said that's a stupid idea. Was it? I don't know. But it's a great example where the business executive has to take into account, or military leader, whatever the context is, the data that's presented, but they to inform their decision, but the bold leader will still be requiring, you still require the bold leader to make their decisions. And sometimes that may be counter to the data itself and what the use cases say. And the third point I just will put out there is everybody's excited about AI. Everybody's excited about the impact of AI, but not everybody understands that AI is all about the underlying data, the training data, and the inference data, and the predictive analytic model that's used to give you a result that might be insightful, beneficial, or lethal. And there's a very slippery slope between those. So in terms of use cases, I think AI may be the more compelling kind of a buzz about the opportunities in, but the reality is it is a pervasive opportunity to better leverage the underlying data.
Absolutely. It's great. Adam, is there a use case that you want to highlight?
Sure. First of all, sorry I dropped off. I was so offended by David's comment that I had to leave and come back. I'm not really sure what happened there. Yeah, so I'll give an example back from my corporate days, 20-something years ago. I worked for a company that sold domain names and domain name related services. So being able to perform analytics actually came into play on the very first day I was there. I was a junior developer at the time, and they gave me a task of finding out which domains were actually using our DNS and which ones weren't, which ones even had IP addresses and which ones weren't. So my big job for the first 3 weeks of employment with this company was to run NS lookups and pings, which if you're ever looking for something fun, that's not it. And that actually allowed us to clean up our DNS servers, which at the time were on bind 8.1, if that means anything to you, which had a limit of 65,000 zones per name server, but we had 100,000 names per zone per name server, which meant that we were always down because everything crashed. So we had to use that information in order to clean up our business and take us to literally the largest DNS provider in the world for about 7 years. But it wasn't just that, right? The next thing was we started selling add-on services. So now that you know that someone's come through and purchased a domain name like adamburstein.com, and they go and say, okay, what other services can we provide? So you need to know about your user. You need to know what services they've already procured, whether they procured it through you or through a third-party channel. How are you going to market to them, where they're located? Where they're located can determine what services you're legally allowed to offer them. So if someone is located externally to the US, you're not allowed to sell them US-based encryption, for example. So we couldn't sell them secure certs. So I think that's part one of the use case. Part two of the use case was a guy I worked with at that organization. I love him, but I don't. He would come up to me every Friday knowing that he had to give me information for the third-party partners that we needed by Friday. He had to come to me by Monday. He would come to me Friday afternoon and say, Adam, you got to help me out with this. I need this guy up and running right now. He's the largest He's the largest domain name provider on the third floor of this building in downtown Tulsa when the sun is shining from the east. Like, if you want to talk about data analytics, that's it. Being able to slice and dice your data in such a way that you can tell a story that you want to tell and, to your benefit. I don't think you can come up with a better example of this guy, Vin, names going unmentioned, last names are going unmentioned, that was able to slice and dice that data in such a way that he could compel anyone to try and help him as best he could, even though that customer was good for 7 domain names a year, and some of our partners were good for 7 domain names a minute. So I think that's one of the best use cases. How do you slice and dice your data to tell your story?
Absolutely, absolutely. We are coming up on the top of the hour. As much as I would like this discussion to go on for much longer, and I can't. I have so many other questions that I want to hear your stories about, hear your experiences. However, we are at the top of the hour. So, is there any last thoughts, any key advices that you want to share before we wrap this up?
Sure, I'll kick it off. Don't be afraid. Um, I will tell you candidly, when I was in grad school, my worst class, the one that almost caused me not to get my degree, was databases. I hated them. I hated everything about data. And now the only thing I focus on is data, one way or another. Don't be afraid to step into the unknown. Don't be afraid to ask the questions, the hard questions, even if they're the ones that you're not sure are going to give you the story you need to tell. They're going to come in helpful later on. They're going to be very useful when you try to piece your bigger picture together. So just embrace the fact that you have the power. I mean, data is power. So you have the power to leverage information for your benefit. Don't be rogue, but be sure to embrace the fact that you have the ability to leverage information that other people may not have as readily available, and that you can help them do their jobs. And just remember that you're working as part of a team. So be prepared to share that data. Be prepared to help others achieve their goals. In the most efficient, most effective manner, because in the end, it's going to help you as you go through your daily routine in your career.
Yeah, any finding is important and needs to be tracked and used later on. You never know when it becomes a valuable asset for you. AJ, David, any last
Yeah,
thought?
I would just say always try and make sure you've got a sponsor for the data discovery program, so that whatever the result of that is can then drive an impact for the organization, and recruit local guides, subject matter experts who are familiar with the way in which that data is used operationally to get those right next steps to complete that program successfully.
I really like both AJ and Adam's points here. Knowledge is power, and there's no substitute for having done your homework and knowing what's in the data sets, what the being informed data tells in terms of the situation that drives the decisions. And AJ's comment about find a guide. I was thinking this week I was into the dentist, and going to the dentist is a bit painful, as everybody has done, but it's an important thing to do. But I don't do my own dental work. I pay a trained professional who rolls up his sleeves and gets in there. And sometimes there's a level of intimacy of having somebody else's hands in your mouth. But at the end of the day, I'm better for it. There are great organizations, Hitachi and Booz Allen among some of them, that have trained professionals to help folks on that journey. And as AJ says, finding the right partner to help be the guide on that journey is critical, but there's no reason to shy away from it. Sometimes, again, as I say, it might be painful, but embrace the pain and be empowered as a result.
Oh my God, all such valuable advices. Thank you so much for being a panelist in this. I can't wait to have more of this discussion in a future session, if possible. So I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to be here. Let's wrap this up with certain call to action and giveaways. So as part of the closing remarks, I want to mention that please continue learning with additional resources that will be provided after today's webinar. Please schedule a discussion with a Hitachi Vantara federal expert. We would love to hear your thoughts on it, any challenges you're having, and keep talking more on this particular topic. We do have a hands-on workshop coming up on May 2nd. It'll be a half day at the Carasoft Conference Center in Reston, Virginia. So if you're local, you're able to make it, please come join us. It'll be covering the Pentaho Plus data integration and analytics product. We'll be working through a use case. And we do have the other sessions that we have had so far in the Talk Data to Me series, which covered data ops and e-discovery in 2 of the earlier sessions. Look forward to having you review them and come back with us any feedbacks. And the giveaway that I was mentioning early on is 10 attendees will get a Talk Data to Me t-shirt. It's a fun one, so hopefully you get a chance to win it and you get to show it around as well. Yeah, and this is again my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear more from you and keep this discussion going on. And do provide us feedback on what additional topics you would like to like for us to cover as part of this webinar series in a future session. Once again, I would like to thank the panelists for joining us today and sparing their valuable time. Appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone. And